So I want to introduce myself. I'm Sarah West. I have the pleasure of being the Director of Campaigns and Communications at Hospice UK. And I joined Hospice UK about 6 months ago, and talking to Tracy was like a bit of a gift, really, because she said, well, can we do something, please, with Dying Matters? It's been 10 years. It's done some amazing work. But, you know, we'd like to come in and have another look and see what else we could do to reinvigorate and think about where we are 10 years down the line, because our society is incredibly different, believe it or not, 10 years later. So I've been given the wonderful task of working with people, you all, to try and look at what we're doing with this wonderful campaign. So I'm going to take you through what we've been looking at recently and where we're going to be going into the future. And I want to share with you some new findings that we have just delivered, which will be really exciting because we haven't had this information before. And I want to also spend a bit of time during my slot to have a little bit of work from you to hear your thoughts and ideas about what we should be doing, but more of that in a few moments. So you don't need much introduction here. We know that we have a national context that we have to work within, and it's a very clear and specific requirement for all our local and national organisations to be promoting and encouraging death, dying and talking about bereavement and taking steps to break those down. So it's fantastic to see a room full of people who are already doing that. And I guess my plea to you would be to encourage as many colleagues and friends to do the same as you leave today. So the Dying Matters campaign, for those of you that have been on the journey, you know that Hospice UK merged and we took on the Dying Matters campaign in 2017. And our aim hasn't changed. It stays the same. It's still to raise public awareness about the importance of talking openly about these issues and, importantly, making people's wishes known. But it's definitely time to have a refresh, time to look at being maybe some more ambitious. We have around 12,000 supporters who regularly sign up, who receive our information, and we have the following organisations who've all partnered with the campaign over the last 10 years or so, and we hope that we can continue to engage and partner with them as we move forward into the next decade. So I've spent some time looking at the campaign, looking at where we've got to, and I discovered that overall in the UK, we have the incidence of positive actions relating to death have either plateaued or fallen in recent years. So this is a national picture. It's not to do with necessarily the Dying Matters campaign. On the right-hand side, to your left, it's about writing a will, and we can see that that amount has stayed roughly equal. The next set of columns are about registering as an organ donor, and again, that stayed roughly equal. Where you see the big reduction in the green bar is about talking about the end-of-life care wishes, and we've seen a big drop-off of that, along with people writing down their wishes. And then on the right, the far side, is the number of people that want to talk about their funeral wishes. So this is not an exact science, it's not exact, it gives us a rough indication that although we have started as a sector to talk more about this, the general public are not necessarily picking that up. So we need to think about doing a few things a bit differently. One of the things that I've looked at, and you know, I know that there's a lot of knowledge in this room, but if you go out of this room and you start talking to people who don't necessarily think about this on a regular basis, they really don't know. And we have no idea who the driving forces are in the public that could make some significant change or encourage those conversations and actions. Do we know what people at the end of their lives, how comfortable they feel, what they want to talk about, how they want to talk about that with on death, dying and bereavement? Will people engage, and will they campaign? Will they be keen to do more? And how do we activate those people that are subscribing to the campaign so far? Ultimately, is it the right goal for us to be leading a conversation to change behaviour, to reduce stigma and to get people to overcome fear? So a lot of what we're going to be doing in the next few months to this year is really looking at how do we manage to do that and what lessons can we learn. So we're going to be launching a refreshed targeted campaign in 2021 because that will give us this year to do a lot of the research and the groundwork that I believe is needed. We're going to use an audience-led insight approach, which is not something that Dying Matters has done to date in lots of detail. So I'm quite excited about what that might bring. And the campaign is going to create meaningful impact in public knowledge, public discourse, and the behaviour of society. So we want to lead more people to experience a good death. But to do that, I need to have a clearer sense of understanding who supporters are at the moment. We have 12,000 of them, and I'm happy today to be able to share with you that research that we've done. Many of you in the room may well have contributed to that research by filling our survey in online, in which case, big thanks. And I'm going to share these results with you for the first time. And then from there, it'll be looking at the wider general public. Now, there's a lot of research out on this subject. What I don't want to do is replicate that. I want to complement it. So I'm looking forward to working with people to find out a bit more about what is currently existing and what we actually know and don't know about knowledge and attitudes. We then need to develop messaging so that we can identify our target audiences and the best chance of creating that behaviour change in those audiences so that we can ultimately design an effective campaign. The last 6 months or so, we've been looking at various aspects of this and sort of starting to test a few things. We've changed the logo, so we're a little bit more consistent with the Hospice UK logo. We've been looking at the campaign, talking to people that are involved with it. And for the first time, we did at our national conference in November, Dying for Change, the Hospice UK had a complete section and a workshop around Dying Matters campaign, which was great. So we had a good turnout for that and some really exciting discussions. Then in October, we launched #IRemember. I don't know how many of you were involved in that, but it was a digital test really to see what is the kind of appetite that's out there for people to want to engage. And it was a moment to be able to use Halloween and Day of the Dead as a way of a peg to try and get people to think about these sorts of issues. So we asked people to post a photograph and talk about who they remembered. And I'm really pleased to say that it reached 11 million people. We were not expecting it to be that popular. And as a result, we will be doing this again and hoping to be able to build on this in the future. Then, of course, we're all here to kick off the Dying Matters Awareness Week and the Dying to be Heard. And we've done our subscriber research. So we need to now look at putting some flesh on the bones of our strategy. We are looking to do year-round communications. So I think the coalition has tended to do a real focus on once a year and the Dying Matters Awareness Week, which has been great. But actually, we need to be far more visible and far more vocal all year. And that means that we're going to be introducing a couple of digital campaigns, 2 waves in the year, to supplement and add to the Dying Matters Awareness Week. One of those will be the October digital campaign, which we're going to build up, the whole I Remember. And then we're now looking at another opportunity in the year to see whether we can find another peg or something that people think would be really creative and of interest that we can galvanise the public around. We also want to be a lot more proactive in our outreach and our media. There's a lot more discussion, I think, and a lot more media articles about death and dying and grief. And we really need to be starting to talk to people about that. We'll be refreshing the website, so you can look forward to seeing some slight changes there and the social media. And we're going to be also talking to our partners as well about how we can convince and work effectively together. There are a number of brilliant charities that have been doing some research, doing some campaigns recently about death, dying and grief. So we really want to be pulling together, and the more the merrier, in my view. And of course, we have to find funding for the campaign because, sadly, it doesn't run on thin air. So that's something that I'm going to be looking at as we move forward. Now, I want to take us into something a little bit more technical. Forgive me, if you will. I've spent the last few months working very closely with the Time to Change campaign team, who have managed to kick off and worked over the last 10 years, and I think have done an amazing job of putting mental health right at the centre of our public discourse. And I thought, well, that was an extremely stigmatised, challenging issue, and yet now we're starting to see traction in the country, with people being more open and talking about it. So for me, death, dying and grief is equally as stigmatised. What lessons could we learn? So they've been incredibly generous, so my big thanks to Time to Change, and they have shared a lot of the information and a lot of the lessons that they've learned on their 10-year journey that I think are going to be really exciting for us to be able to draw on so that we can start looking at our journey ahead. So you can always work out whether you've got an impact by looking at the number of people that have read something, the number of people that have listened to something, but it's quite speculative and it's quite difficult to prove that you've actually made a tangible difference. So I'm interested in exploring for our campaign the use of a behaviour change model to see what sort of impact we can actually measure as we move forward. Now, this particular model is called COM-B. The details will be lost on people further back. My apologies for that, but we will be sharing all of the slides on the presentation in the day afterwards. But this is a system that's used by the National Citizen Service, Public Health England, and the Money Advice Trust to encourage people not just to be aware of stuff, but to actually change attitude and change behaviour. And the model is used to provide a snapshot of the barriers and the drivers of behaviour of your different key audiences. And it means that you're asking questions when you evaluate your work as to say whether you can confidently say whether attitudes have changed and therefore behaviour. So that very much enables us to determine the type of content that we need to be talking about when using with our different audiences, because it needs to be tailored and nuanced for each audience specifically. And give you a quick example, Time to Change knew that men were not comfortable talking about mental health issues, and so they designed their campaign having used a model like this, and they were able to measure pre and post the campaign that 38% of men would now step in to help a friend who is struggling with mental health illness. So I think there's a lot that we can learn about how we might be able to go about measuring whether we are actually making a difference nationally in getting more people to talk about death, dying and grief. So we will kick off in April 2021. And we are committing to a longer-term campaign, at least minimum of 5 years, to see the benefit and the change. And I really hope that I can come back to you and say, yes, we've seen a 6% shift in the public behaviour towards this issue. So that's where I'm aiming for. That's what I'm kind of hoping to strive for with your help. And we want a strategy that maintains this wonderful rooting in local community and all the incredible work that you do, as well as really beefs up that national voice that we need to come together and be to get people feeling more comfortable talking about these issues. And I want to make sure that we're targeted, measurable and impactful, because I'm sure funders will be happier with us if we are. So let me take you into some of the research that we've just done. Many of you in the room may class yourself as supporters, but we've just done a little bit of looking at some of the details around here. Much of this may not be that much of a surprise to some of you. We saw that 83% of our 12,000 supporters are women. And we know that 80% of them are between the ages of 45 and 74 years old. So in order for us to be able to do more effective campaigning, we need to have some good understanding as to who we're already talking to and is engaging with us, in order for us to be able to look at the wider public and who we then need to go on and talk to. 73% of these people said that they were professionals, and the majority of people have been personally affected. So no surprise then that there's a connection there for people to want to talk about these issues. There's been a significant exposure to end-of-life experiences, whether that's as a professional in your job or as you're personally being bereaved. What's really exciting from my point of view is that 7 out of 10 people would be very comfortable persuading others to take action. So I think we have a group of people here that if we get it right at Dying Matters and Hospice UK, we can really encourage more collective action nationally on these issues. And the main motivation, we have 3 out of 10 people organising a Dying Matters event, and you might be able to tell me differently, is that it's basically to increase that discussion, but also because some of you, it's a part of your job, part of the role that you've been given and asked to do. In terms of the drivers for planning end-of-life stage, we kind of asked people what they thought were the prompts for that. No surprise, age is obviously a key driver, and life stage is also extremely important. So having children, moving house, getting retired, seeing other loved ones dying, those are the sorts of things that maybe open up our opportunities to talk more about these issues. Proximity to the end of life, again, no surprise there, and people's knowledge about the end of life, so those that may have accompanied people as they're dying or have lost loved ones to death. And sadly, negative experiences figure quite highly, so people just don't want other people to go through what they've been through if it's been a difficult and unhappy journey, either as a relative or for the person themselves who were dying. And then we asked the 12,000 people, what are the main barriers, do you think, to people really wanting to be engaged and talk about these issues? And I've just chosen the top 3. There's a lot more of them. But the top is avoiding thinking about your own death and your own incapacitation. Again, that's no surprise. None of us particularly want to think about that. But that's an important point that we have to think about in terms of how do we overcome that. Then we have 64 people saying it's very much a social taboo. There's not many people will sit down at a dinner table and start asking about this issue, unless, of course, you're a professional, and then everybody wants to talk to you about that, right? And then there's busy lifestyles, which really surprised me. But then when I reflected on it, I thought, actually, no, we are incredibly busy as people. The last thing that we're often doing is thinking about writing a will or planning our funeral or talking to our loved ones about what we want for our end-of-life care. So those are the top barriers. Then we asked people, well, what can we do? And a bit like Tom and Simon and their research, there's no consensus, and there's probably no surprise that there's no consensus, because this is such an individual thing, isn't it, that we all experience. But there were some common themes that people said we should be looking at, making sure that we change the culture and the language around end of life. 23% said improve the media and the celebrity coverage of it. And 21% said that campaign needs to improve its reach and impact. And I absolutely take that on, and that's what we're hoping to be able to do. And then in terms of recommendations, personal stories came out top. And I completely agree. You know, the most powerful things are, aren't they, when you're sitting and listening to somebody's story about this. People suggested training for the medical sector to be more open, funeral directors to be able to present the full range of what is available to people at the end of their lives, and importantly, community level action or the face-to-face work that I know many people in this room are involved with. And that's so important because it's really difficult to do this sensitively if you're taking a big, broad brushstroke. So those individual conversations are really important, and our partnerships. So these are cultural and psychological barriers, and they are major inhibitors. But we can't give up, and we have to look at those barriers, and we have to find ways to be able to look at how we can overcome them. So I think the Dying Matters campaign needs to ask itself, where are we uniquely placed to help break down these barriers? We do not do any of this on our own. We don't do this as our own campaign. We need to do this all collectively. And so I'm afraid I'm going to get you working just for 10 minutes, I promise, because I believe that actually if you're going to create change, you're going to have to act boldly. And that isn't always comfortable. It's about trying to change people's views and perspectives. And yes, of course, there's sensitivity. But is there something that we could and should be doing that we as a sector, if you like, are not? And we think it's time to do something with. Now, there are 4 questions up on the screen, and I will read them out. For those at the back, I'll come and talk to you as well. If you wouldn't mind getting around your tables, or if you're not sitting at a table, joining a table, there's a flip chart paper and there's pens. And I wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind just taking 10 minutes or so to discuss with each other what you think we can do as Dying Matters to lead meaningful change. How do we inspire other people? What do we stop doing so that we can actually focus on this and be effective. So what isn't working from your experience? What do you know doesn't wash with people? And then finally, what does a society look like that's comfortable with death? Which is a big question that I'm kind of asking at the moment. You know, where's the vision? What are we heading to? And so any thoughts on that? Now, you don't need to answer all the questions. I'm not going to kind of test you on any of this, but just to get your thoughts and capture those on a piece of paper would be enormously helpful for me. We're going to do it for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back, and for the last 5 minutes of my slot, I'll just do a bit of a roving mic for any thoughts and comments that might have come up through that time. So please feel free to just chat, discuss. You might want to take one question, you might want to take all of them, you might want to say something completely different. Okay, that's right. Okay, right. What I'd like to ask is any thoughts and comments that have come out of those discussions. Would anybody be, for the last 5 minutes, prepared to share anything that they've talked about? Or indeed any questions that they might have? It's going to be one person. Yes, thank you. There's just a mic on the way.
Hi, I am the nurse in a retirement village at Longbridge, Birmingham, which is run by Extra Care Charitable Trust. We put on a Dying Matters event last year, which was very well attended. And at the moment, we're getting accreditation for GSF. Now, within the GSF, one of the requirements is they use the traffic light system. And as people move through that, one of the requirements is to discuss with them and their relatives advanced care planning, which has been really good for us because it's opened up a whole...
Interesting.
You know, so the village has got 340 residents. So if you think about that amount of people and their relatives, we are getting to quite a big group there. But one of the problems I've had is that for our, you know, when we have the Dying Matters event, to get the leaflets from the Dying Matters site, a lot of the leaflets are very expensive to purchase, and not all of them can be downloaded and printed off. So I think that's one of the things that would definitely help if we can access and the leaflets are very good. I've looked at them, but, you know, they are quite expensive to purchase.
I'm glad you've raised it, because we're about to talk to you about how we're planning to do that differently in the next session so that we can make sure things are a bit more accessible for people, because I do hear we're all really cash strapped and it can be quite challenging. So Toby's going to pick up and give a little bit more information on that, but I would really thank you very much for mentioning the GSF. That's the gold standards framework, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's not something that we might want to have a look at. I know that we're involved as Hospice UK working with on that. And the other thing as well is the retirement villages. I think, you know, that sounds to me like a really great opportunity to start thinking about how do we get some of this information more widely known there. Thank you.
I mean, just quickly, the other thing was that on our table, other people were saying I didn't pay to go on the GSF training, but apparently the GSF training is very expensive. Right. So, you know, it's difficult for nursing homes, residential homes, perhaps, to get their staff onto the training. I don't know whether, you know, a more online friendly training that's cheaper could be looked at. Definitely.
Well, I think we're talking to a university at the moment who are keen to do something similar. So we are exploring lots of different options and avenues, because knowledge, information, it's really important that people are able to access that. And another reason why I'm really keen to change the website, because it isn't that user friendly, and we need to make sure that people can find the information they need. Probably got time for one more question. I'm being cheeky because we've slightly overrun, but we start late. So if anybody else has got any comments? Yes, lady next to you, Steph, or is there somebody down? Oh yeah, please go ahead.
I hogged it. Sorry.
That's all right. Go for it.
We came up with the idea of targeting the youngest age group. So if your child is in the back of the car questioning why you're using your mobile phone, then it actually starts you thinking differently, doesn't it? So if children were coming home, or young people were coming home saying, "Have you written a will, Mum? What happens if you die?" to your healthy parents, maybe that's something to think of. We were just also saying there's an issue there, a bit like sex education, that a lot lot of parents won't like that idea, but maybe it's about campaigning to have that sort of thing clear in the national curriculum, that dying's as important as living. You also thought about social responsibility, so putting it as you don't drive without insurance, so why are you living without a plan? So that might be another way of targeting it. Making it clearer what hospice and palliative care are about, so them being such scary things, scary mysteries that we don't talk about openly. What matters to me being an important question, and that if we were all comfortable with death, we'd be having open conversations, good plans, and using the proper words like death and dying as opposed to passing away and drifting off.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but if you could come and find me in the lunch break and we can have a chat, I would be really keen to hear ideas, suggestions, thoughts, and obviously differences of opinion too, because that's really important. Thank you all very much, and I will be collecting the flip chart paper, so don't destroy it, please. Thank you.